Hello and welcome to Team Building Offense in Uber's UU. I just wanted to make this guide because I feel like I haven't seen any resources for team building for the tier thus far, and I thought it'd be helpful for newer players to get in to a meta that's kind of developed and is maybe a little hard to enter. So first we're going to get into what exactly is offense, focus on the three main tenets of offense and what you need, and then look over a couple types of offense, and then after that I'll do an example of team building. So first of all, offense is a team style that's just really a lot of powerful attackers. You're only going to have one or two bulky utility mons. Let's look at this team for example. You have a lot of firepower here. Palkia, Haxorus, Rillaboom can do a lot of damage. Everything here can do a lot of damage. You only have a little bit of utility in things like Magearna, who's able to set spikes and pivot with Volt Switch, as well as Rillaboom, who's able to U-turn, knock off, and generally take a hit or two. And we can see in this team the three basic tenets: hazards, power, and speed. We have hazards here on the Magearna, setting spikes. We have a lot of power in things like Haxorus, Palkia, Palafin, and it's some good speed control between raw natural speed like Palkia or Haxorus after Scale Shot, as well as priority and Grassy Glide on Rillaboom and Jet Punch on the Palafin. So let's get into the first of the three tenets, as I like to call them. First, there's hazards. Typically, if you're playing offense, you want to get some sort of hazards up. Offense likes to get hazards up because this supports the high firepower targets like Haxorus or Palkia. Basically, the idea is that if you get up Stealth Rocks or Spikes, you can damage things that might usually live a hit from 100% and put them into range of a one-hit KO. It's a lot easier to one-hit KO something that's at 76 or 88% than something at 100%. And something like Hyper Offense will usually just have a dedicated lead for this role, getting hazards down and dying. Keeping them off your side is not so much of a thing that offense usually worries about, because usually you just want to apply pressure, and if they get rid of your hazards, well, that's a free turn to set up or attack. But if you do want to keep hazards off your field because you have particularly hazard-weak Pokemon, really your only good option for offense is Cyclizar with Rapid Spin. Cyclizar is good with Rapid Spin because it can either threaten the Rapid Spin, but if your opponent has something like Giratina, say, who wants to switch in on the Rapid Spin to block it, you can always Shed Tail out, and that gives you more momentum. Cyclizar is really good for offense, but if you want to do any sort of hazard removal, that's really your only other option. Other things are just too slow, too much of momentum sinks in general. Second, we have power. There's two types of power, really. There's immediate power and setup, both of which are pretty straightforward. Immediate power is the turn you're able to attack, you do, and you're doing a lot of damage immediately. Chi-Yu, its choice specs. Zacian, with its +1 from Intrepid Sword and a choice band. Palkia in general, same for Landorus. These things can all do a lot of damage really quickly. But there's also setup, which is generally more threatening after they're able to accomplish that setup, but of course they need that turn or two to get going. Nasty Plot Flame Charge Chi-Yu is something you can run. It's a bit of a surprise factor. You have Nasty Plot on Landorus, Sword Stance on Zacian, even Trailblaze on Zacian too. These are examples of setup, which are a lot scarier once they get going, but they need that time to cook in the oven before they're ready to come out. And lastly, there's speed. Again, there's two types of speed. There's pure speed, which is, just what the speed stat says. Something like Dragapult, who's naturally very fast. Sneasler, who's basically the fastest thing in the tier after it hits Unburden. And the idea of speed is that you are hitting first. You want to hit first because generally your guys do not have any bulk investment and they can't take a lot of strong hits. That is what you want to have a lot of speed on. However, you might have priority users too, which are good for two things. They are able to kill the things with pure speed and stop them from setting up. For example, Palafin with Jet Punch is really good at taking out a Sneasler, even if it's got Sword Stance and Unburden going, because you can just bypass its speed, use priority, take it out. Another common user is Extreme Speed Arceus, who can run bulk and ignore its speed stat, outrunning the slower things anyway because it's Arceus, but also being able to hit the things that outspeed it with Extreme Speed. Extreme Speed and Jet Punch are the best kinds of priority in this tier, along with Grassy Glide, and these are really your answer for things that outspeed you. So three types of offense. I'm really only going to go over hyper offense in detail later, but we'll look at all of them. So we've got basic offense, which is like the team that I showed earlier. You have a little bit of utility, a little bit of defensive, but again, the core idea is hazards, speed, and power. You have some setup sweepers, maybe some choice users. The idea is to really just use these in succession, pivot them in safely with your limited utility, and just try to bulldoze your opponent. Next is bulky offense, which I am really not going to go for that much. It's pretty different from what I've been discussing, but generally the idea is that you're running a lot more bulk. You need to be able to tank hits instead of getting up a lot of speed, and you're more likely to run a bulky setup sweepers like Calm Mind or Bulk Up, and generally this is a bit beyond the scope of this video, but it's something worth mentioning, and also you don't want to confuse it with balance or stall, but it can be kind of hard to identify immediately. And finally, we have hyper offense, which is definitely the most popular form of offense, especially if you're a beginner, because I find it's the easiest to build around. Because basically you just have one dedicated lead, who's going to do screens or veil like Alolan Ninetales, a sticky web like Galvantula, or basic hazards with stealth rocks and spikes like Deoxys. The idea with the dedicated lead is to get up utility, whether it's webs, veil, or hazards, and then just die. The dedicated lead doesn't really need to stick around. It has one purpose: set up and get out. And then after the dedicated lead, it's just all speed and power. You don't have any utility really. It's just all setup sweepers or just choice users, either immediately attacking, setting up for one turn. Really, the idea is to absolutely just plow through your opponent with like a bowling ball and try to just break them very quickly. Hyper offense would love to end a game in 20 turns or less, because really, they can't stick around for much longer. Okay, so now that we've discussed the basic tenets of how to build offense, I want to do an example of how I might build a team. It will be a little rushed, of course, but that's fine. So first of all, we want to decide what kind of hyper offense am I going to build? Is it going to be screens, webs, or just basic hazards? And to keep things simple, I'm just going to go with basic hazards. And one lead I really like is Deoxys. With its high speed stat and also high attack stats, it can reliably, taunt, deny other hazards, or get up its own hazards. So because it's not bulky, you want to sash on pretty much every hyper offense lead except maybe Alolan Ninetales. But Deoxys here, we're going to give a sash. We're going to max out its speed because it doesn't need any bulk. We can just ignore attack. I'm not going to have any attacking moves on this, and it's a micro optimization, 0 attack IVs. And then the rest we will dump into special attack because we'll have just our one attack down here, Psycho Boost. Psycho Boost, we don't really care about getting off the drop. We click this once at most, and then Deoxys is going to die anyway. Then we'll have Taunt. This denies other leads from getting up their own hazards or setting up veil or sticky webs or what have you. And this is really good on Deoxys because it outspeeds pretty much everything. And then we'll just have some hazards like Stealth Rock and Spikes. And this is a pretty good generic lead. We'll give a Terra Ghost just in case, a freak circumstance we need to block a spin. After this, things really open up. Let's go with, you can see we have a lot of options here. Always a solid option is Palkia Origin. Lustrous Globe you're always going to have. Terra type, we're not going to worry about too much here, honestly. I'm probably just going to ignore that for the rest of the video, because that's a bit of its own different topic. But with Palkia, we always want to go max speed, max special attack, timid, 0 attack IVs. You have the choice between Hydro Pump and Surf for your water stab. I'm going to click Hydro Pump mostly. And for Dragon, you almost always want Spatial Rend because it's more reliable than Draco Meteor. Especially getting crits is also nice. And not dropping, of course, is the main draw. And then after this, we can have either Earth Power really or Fire Blast. I like to go Fire Blast. It's a little riskier, of course, with the miss chance, but it's pretty hard to deal with. And it also lets Palkia threaten grass types, like Arceus Grass. I might otherwise kind of sit on it. And then finally, Palkia is pretty good at forcing switches, which makes it a good substitute user. So that's a good just generic offensive Pokemon, and now we'll move on to maybe a setup sweeper of some kind. One setup sweeper that I really like is Arceus Fire. Now Arceus Fire really takes advantage of what I talked about earlier. We don't have to invest any speed. Instead we're going to go 248 bulk, which is a micro optimization if you have an odd number on your HP. Max out the attack at the expense of any special attack. And, just for those spare EVs, we dump into speed to maybe outspeed a 0 speed or 4 speed Arceus. And we gotta give it its plate, of course, so we'll do the flame plate. And the way Arceus is gonna do things is, first of all, a Swords Dance. It's gonna be its boosting move. I like to run Recover, which really takes advantage of Arceus' really high natural bulk, especially with its HP investment. This thing is really hard to kill and can generally just stick around on the field for a long time. And then after that, we have Flare Blitz, and Extreme Speed is when you want to run with Swords Dance. You have that raw, really high base power move with Flare Blitz, which you don't take a ton of recoil from because of your high HP. And then for speed control, you have Extreme Speed. And here's one thing where I will bother with the Terra. You always want pretty much Terra Normal if you're running this set, because it really gives your Extreme Speed that extra boost that it needs. So we have an Arceus, a Deoxys, and a Palkia so far. But maybe we want some better speed control. And this is where you can think about some sort of Scarf user. One of the best Scarf users in the format is Landorus, undoubtedly. That 101 speed on its own isn't great in the tier. It's pretty good, but with Scarf that's really going to elevate it. We're not going to run any attacking or physical attacking moves on this, so we can ignore that. Dump the rest of the EVs and whatever, doesn't really matter. Max speed, max special attack. So of course we'll have Sheer Force, give it a Choice Scarf, and now we can think about what we want. So first of all, Landorus forces a lot of switches, and this will be our one physical attacking move, even that's not the point, it's just the pivot. U-turn's a really good option on Scarf Landorus. Any Scarf user really likes U-turn. But now of course we got our meaty Earth Power Stab. A good complement to Earth's Power is Sludge Wave. You want to be running Sludge Wave and not Sludge Bomb on Landorus, because you're only getting a base power increase, and you don't care about the poison chance because it's never going to happen with Sheer Force, which by the way is supposed to be our ability. And then after this, as you can see, we have a lot of options. You can choose anything from like Psychic to Grass Knot to Focus Blast. I just like Focus Blast to hit things like Corviknight, so we'll run that. And yeah, here is a good speed control. Landorus is going to be hitting almost 500 speed after that Scarf is applied, and it's going to be outrunning anything that's not boosted on its own. So we have that, a little bit of pivoting, but mostly speed control in the Landorus, but it's a lot of power, of course. And now we want to look at something else. Maybe something with a choice band, like Palafin. Palafin I love to use, it's a personal favorite of mine. When you're going choice band, you always max out the attack. Speed doesn't really matter as much, but you may as well run max speed, because there is a lot of stuff that is relevant to outrun with Flip Turn, or really Wave Crash. But you can definitely play around with the EVs. You can run more bulk if you want. You could hit certain benchmarks, like I think 278 or something is important. I don't really remember off the top of my head. But these are definitely something you can play around with. But for now, we'll just run the max speed, max attack. And we're going to give him a choice band. You do, of course, need to get Palafin in once, which can be a little bit of a burden on hyper offense. But, I mean, the trade-off of how good Palafin is, it's pretty worth it. Also need to give it a nature real quick. And Palafin pretty much usually is Terra Water and a lot of water moves, as you might expect. So we have, of course, Jet Punch, its signature better version of Aqua Jet. Flip Turn is nice for getting momentum if you think they're going to switch into something that resists you, like, let's say they have a Dondozo or Toxapex. There's nothing you can do to those guys, so Flip Turn's a great option for that. If you're faster and you just need to do a ton of damage, Wave Crash is great. And then you can run a couple different things. Most typically you're going to see Close Combat, just to hit, some generic other types. Fighting's just good coverage in general. And now we have just one slot left. Let's think about what we have. We have 2 physical attackers, 2 special attackers. We're not really counting Deoxys because it's barely ever attacking. But I think I want another sub because we have Scarf, Band. This guy doesn't really set up. And who better than one of the kings of the tier themselves, Zacian. So with Zacian, we're going to run, I think, a Lumberry in this case, because we're doing the setup. A lot of people like to run Boots, that's also valid. I'm just going to run Lumberry because it's pretty good at preventing the status you might be taking during your turns of setup. So we're going to run Swords Dance, and although it's a bit of a gimmicky set, we'll just throw Trailblaze on because it's kind of funny. And then after that, we just really need Play Rough, and this is another Terror type to consider. Usually with Zacian, if you're setting up, you need to be able to hit certain targets with Terra Blast, because there are a lot of things that can typically resist you. Typically you're going to do either Fire or Ground. In this case, we'll just do Ground. So give it Terra Blast. We're going to run Max Speed since we're bothering to Trailblaze. And then of course, Max Attack. Max Speed just so we don't get outsped by other Zacians or whatnot. And yeah, this is a pretty complete team. It may not be that good, but after this, there's only one phase for you and I, and that's testing. You're never going to build a perfect team on the first go around. You have to accept that. And the most important part of improving your team is testing, seeing what you run into, seeing what you're good against, and more importantly, seeing what you struggle against. And that's when you come back to the team builder and you really start to tinker. You can also bother with the calculator. That's really good for hitting certain benchmarks on bulk and speed and power. And yeah, after this, you just hit the field and see what happens. And you come back, you improve, and that's how you make a really good team. Thank you for watching. I hope this was really helpful. And get out there and team build.